Next up, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Dr. Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy in the Faculty of Management and is the Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab, all at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois has done a lot of work across the agri-food sector in space, including the beef sector, and his current research interests lie in the broad area of food distribution, security, and safety. Also known as the food professor, Dr. Charlebois is a well-known name in the agri-food industry and beyond. You may know him from the Food Professor podcast, which he co-hosts, the Canadian Food Price Report, which he has published annually since 2012, and his research, which has been featured in several newspapers and media groups nationally as well as internationally. Dr. Charlebois has testified on several occasions before parliamentary committees on food policy-related issues as an expert witness, and has been asked to act as an advisor on food and agricultural policies. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Charlebois co-founded the University of Guelph's Arel Food Institute here in Ontario. So welcome, Dr. Charlebois, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. Actually, I founded the Food Institute, which became the Arel Food Institute later. So very proud, and we're still working with the Arel Food Institute, of course, and we have several projects with the University of Guelph, and we're very proud to count the University of Guelph as a partner. I was there many years ago. I've been at Dal for 8 years. It's been great, but I missed my days in Ontario and Guelph. So when I was invited to join this panel, I immediately said yes to you and Chris, because I think it's some of the things that are going on in Ontario are not very well known to the greater public, and I've always felt that the agricultural sector in Ontario should be more prominent in people's eyes. As I was listening to Dale's presentation, I must say, I do want to congratulate you, Dale, and your family. What you're doing is just amazing. It's quite inspiring. And I just wish that 16 million Ontarians would listen to what you're doing on the farm. Today is Canada Ag Day, and as a lab, we actually did survey 1,600 Canadians, asking them what they think about agriculture and farmers, and you could see that there's a bit of a disconnect, unfortunately. Canadians over 55 actually believe that farmers are great environmental stewards, and based on what's going on at Dale's farm, you can clearly feel the responsibility towards Mother Nature and the things that are making a difference. But the younger generations, I think, are really not well connected with agriculture at all. When we look at our data, clearly that rural urban divide is wider than ever. In fact, and this is something that I think we need to do better to get stories like Dale's out as much as possible, because it's a great story and needs to be known as much as possible. So back to our seminar tonight. I was asked to speak about the beef industry, the beef market in general. That's what we do. We do a bit like Daryl from Oklahoma, but we actually forecast at retail. We try to understand consumers, we forecast prices, we forecast behavior. And tonight I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about what we're seeing about the beef industry, beef demand in general. There's lots of noise out there about all sorts of things, and I just want to tell you more about about the data that we actually have when it comes to Canadians and trends and beef consumption. As you know, every December, as you probably know, in December with the University of Guelph, Saskatchewan, and UBC, we released Canada's Food Price Report. It was our 14th edition in December, and we were forecasting food prices to go up by as much as 4.5%, but the threshold is 2.5 to 4.5. It's pretty important because we actually think that this year we're going to go back to this proverbial sweet spot of 1.5 to 2.5%. And today, actually, I was meeting with many food executives, and they're seeing some really positive signs with supply chains. Things are much more predictable than just 2 years ago. Costs are more under control now. Margins are more under control and predictable as well in processing and in distribution as well. So those are good news overall. But obviously, there are some tensions in the supply chain, and if you're a producer, you probably would know something about that, of course. And this is something that I've spoken about several times, speaking about the lack of discipline in the market, the code of conduct, which is really coming up more and more often, which I'm very pleased about. In fact, a few years ago, if you would have asked me if the code of conduct would make headlines in Canada, I would say you're crazy. But it's actually happening. People are talking about the code of conduct. Costco today actually is now quoted in saying that they are willing to participate in the code of conduct only if everyone actually participates, which I agree with. A code cannot work without all participants being involved actively, which is exactly what the message I gave to Ottawa last week was before the Parliamentary Committee in Agriculture. So things are getting better, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Now, with beef, so we are expecting beef prices or meat prices in general to go up again 5 to 7%. But that's due to pork mainly and chicken, not necessarily beef. And this is a problem for beef. You see, in our data, what we're realizing is that when one component of the meat trifecta goes up, it impacts psyche for consumers. They actually think that meat is getting more expensive. So if you spook consumers with chicken or pork, it's going to impact beef demand, unfortunately. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind. And in 2023, it was not an easy year for consumers. For example, during two quarters, Q2 and Q3, people were actually spending less at the grocery store, not more. And people think, well, food prices were going up, and that's why people were spending less. They were retreating, going for bargains, going to different stores. Well, yes, but the big kahuna were shelter costs. Shelter costs really hit a lot of people hard very quickly. Didn't matter if you rented or had a mortgage. A lot of people were affected, especially the millennials. Millennials were the most hard hit, and that's why they really changed their behavior. Millennials really were known to be the ones asking for everything from the food industry. No hormones, local, no this, no that. Well, 2023 was a really hard year on them, and so they've recalibrated their food budget, and they're looking at food purchasing very differently. Now, are they going to go back to where they were before? There's a chance, of course, but for the meantime, they are really affected financially right now, and they're being very careful with every cent they spent, okay? Especially on the two necessities of life, shelter and food, but one affected the other quite a bit in 2023. The other thing that we notice at the lab in recent years is the amount of money spent on food relative to other stuff people buy retail. In 2017, 20% of all our money spent on retail in Canada was spent on food. 20%. Okay. That went up to 31% in March of 2020 for obvious reasons, but now we're at about 18%, which means that people are actually spending less retail on food than in 2016, 2017. Imagine. So when people are saying food prices are skyrocketing, we have to spend more on food because of food inflation, we don't actually see any evidence of that. We're actually seeing consumers being extremely cautious. They actually are working with the money they have, and that's how they're spent. So, what happens to meat economics when something like this happens? Well, beef is a premium product. So, the way that it's marketed, it's going to make a lot of, it's going to have a huge impact on behavior. And this is the one thing I want to discuss with you guys tonight when it comes to beef prices or meat prices in general. Uh, Often we say high prices will impact demand. High prices will impact how consumers see the category. That's not necessarily true. Uh, High prices is a problem, but the biggest problem, based on the research that we're doing, is price volatility. And let me give you one example. If you ask anybody out there in Canada whether or not vegetable proteins have gone up much more so than animal protein. So if you think of the top four plant-based products that are sold right now in Canada at the grocery store, tracked by StatScan, it's basically hummus, tofu, dry beans, and lentils. Those four, okay? So if you take those four and you ask Canadians, uh, have these products become more expensive than, say, chicken, pork, or beef? The vast majority of Canadians will say it's the animal stuff. Animal proteins have gone up way more. Here are the facts. Since 2020, if you look at the meat trifecta, chicken, pork, and beef, that category went up 7% compared to 2020. But if you compare plant-based products, if you look at plant-based products, they gone up 23%. The difference is volatility. So things have been actually quite steady over the last little while, and it's incredible how people are affected by volatility, and they'll think that your product or your category is very expensive. So the meat category is being impacted by volatility. If there's a way to stabilize prices at retail for at the meat counter, it will help demand for beef.